Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pac-Man World Re-Pac. So we're in the penultimate world, which is the factory. So we had a bit of a recall on this part to begin with. So good thing we're
Yeah, it
here.
turns out
So
there was a bit of the original Part 9 recording had small traces of salmonella, so we had to recall
Yeah,
it and then
FDA
work it from scratch.
regulations state that BrainScratch comms can only have a 2% trace of salmonella in any given part. It was at 5, so we didn't want to get canceled, so we had to do it.
That was only the tip of the iceberg. When it hit market, what they found out was that there was a problem with the ignition, so that people could just steal it right out from under your feet. And instead of being decent people about this, they went and made a YouTube challenge. How many of this part can you steal? Kia was very embarrassed. Okay, so what really happened was that Ted's audio cut off at about 4 minutes into the
This is so we're like 2 weeks removed after we originally finished Pac-Man World, so we don't know exactly what the hell we were even talking about in this part. I recall saying nice at your cheddar cheese counter there on the top left. But if for some reason it seems like they seem kind of like out of it in this part, it's because we already wrapped up this commentary weeks ago.
I have
and we
a
have to go
feeling
back
that
and
we
record
were
this.
at the point in the playthrough where we weren't even talking about the game anymore. Like we weren't even.
But isn't that always the case though?
Yeah,
to be
but
fair?
I feel like it was more egregious than usual. Egregious.
A typical
Egregious?
BrainScratch commentary usually goes talk about game first part, our experiences with it, tangents galore for the rest of the commentary.
well, I mean, we
And
did
that's why you love us.
stay on topic for this game for a decent chunk of the playthrough. But
Yeah, we only had like 4 or 5 Sonic tangents, which I think is a new record.
Okay, so since it's been like a week or 2 weeks, 3 weeks maybe since we last recorded a part, I don't actually remember what was going on. How far into the game are we? Am I real?
This is the factory level, which is kind of like, brown and factory-ish.
Oh, right. I remember. I commented. I think that this level reminds me of the Crash Bandicoot stage, because of the pipes.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah, it was. This is very Cortex.
Yeah, it's very Crash Bandicoot 1 Cortex.
It's all coming back to me, as in that one thing that was mentioned, and everything else is still a blank. What else do we have?
Question for Crash Bandicoot way back when. How, aside from the games being 3D, obviously, because back then anything being in 3D was impressive. Were the Crash games still considered like graphically impressive for the time, even beyond the fact that they were 3D? Or
Well, yeah,
The PlayStation 1 game specifically?
yeah, the PS1 games.
the
Yes.
PlayStation 1 in general was I say in general because the N64 had its highlights, but the PlayStation 1 in general did sort of win the 3D graphics war by a long shot.
Yeah, the N64 like certainly can do higher. It's weird in that it technically has more horsepower, but having less space on a cartridge generally means that you don't have enough room to put fancy looking things in. So
Well, you have enough room to put fancy looking things in. You just usually have to make a sacrifice somewhere. Like when a PS1 game was ported to the N64, like Gex, Mega Man Legends, that sort of thing, they would usually have to like make the voice quality worse, or in Gex's case, take some of the voice clips out entirely, or it would lack the FMVs and would do some sort of in-game substitute for it, because FMVs take up a lot of space. But like, even so, like when the N64 was at the top of its game, I don't really feel like it got to the same heights as the PS1 either.
I feel like the N64 had a couple of problems. One was the fact that, games just didn't run very well on it. I feel like from what I remember, at the very least, more PlayStation 1 games had better and more consistent frame rates, even in 3D, than the N64. which doesn't really make sense to me considering that the N64 has more RAM computer horsepower.
Well,
There's
there's RAM. There's RAM, which is how much stuff the thing can keep in its memory while it's running. There's the CPU, and
it had more
then
bits.
There's the graphic.
They had 64 whole bits. Like, you'd think that those 32 bits extra bits would let it not, make it so games could run a little bit better. But the average frame rate on an N64 game is like 17. So,
I'll tell you a secret about game console marketing back in the day. No one fucking knew what bits meant, which is why they put it on like the frickin' front of the console, because it sounds impressive, even though nobody knows what it actually refers to.
Blast processing.
I'm talking about the consumers at the time. Obviously, I have a better idea of what it means now than I did when I was 4.
Yeah, whenever anybody talks about PC specs to me, my eyes glaze over. I'm like, that sure is a lot of numbers you're shouting at me. I'm sure they are all very impressive.
Nowadays, knowing those numbers is a bit more useful because computer hardware is generally more standardized. So
I just don't understand why they call them thread rippers. I thought CPUs and GPUs were made of circuit boards and microchips. What the fuck is Fabric doing on a damn rig?
Wait, they call it a thread ripper?
Threadripper is the specific classification of a GPU, and I think it's either a GPU or a CPU. But like, we're talking industry grade high end stuff. Like, they're not exactly consumer model.
Yeah, but like, another thing that you got to understand about console hardware of the time, and even PC hardware, because it was a whole other beast, is that a lot of it was very specialized. Like, you weren't getting the same hardware no matter what the numbers were.
Yeah,
so,
I know that having consoles that were easy to port between each other really didn't start until somewhat the PS2 era, and kind of, not even really in the PS3 era. Like, it happened, but there definitely was a lot of work that had to be done to make PS3 and Xbox 360 copies of third-party games.
Half the reason the PS3 wasn't as successful early on was because it was more complicated to develop for. The architecture wasn't as straightforward as the Xbox 360. So, like, the main advantage that it had was that when people knew how to develop for it, it could do some pretty amazing things for the time. But it turns out that what people want isn't a console that can do pretty amazing things. It's a console that can do what a PC can do.
And that's why nowadays if you can develop for one of them, you can develop for any of them. Like, even Switch, if you're willing to make graphical.
The Switch is really just a tablet at its core.
If you're willing to make graphical compromises for a Switch version, or like, just, set the settings low enough. I'm sure it's more complicated than that, but like, if you can make a game for one of the consoles, you can make a game for all three, generally speaking nowadays. That wasn't really in PS1, N64 land, there were very few games that were on all the consoles, and that's why a game like Rayman 2 has 17 different versions that are all super different.
Don't even get me started on how the Saturn factored into all of that while it was still alive.
Oh god, the Saturn. There are very few games that I think came out on Saturn, PlayStation, and N64. Like, most things were on PlayStation at the time, and then you would maybe get one or the other of the two consoles. I'm struggling to think of a game that was on all three. Especially considering that the Saturn and the N64 had such different specialties. Like, the N64 was supposed to be the console for 3D games, and the Saturn was the one for 2D games. So it's like... Yeah.
Well, I mean,
two and two together.
You say that, but the Saturn could do 3D relatively well if people knew how to do it. It's just that, like, by the time developers figured that shit out, it was like around the time Shining Force 3 came out, and the console was barely alive at that point.
When did the Saturn basically stop? Because the Dreamcast came out in 99, I think?
8.
98.
8 in Japan,
Okay.
99 in America.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Ish.
like, were they still doing Dreamcast stuff by that point, or...
Saturn.
That's what I meant, sorry. Were they still doing Saturn stuff by that point?
That was a nice save.
Because the Saturn was always more of a thing in Japan than it was in the West. And if there were any sort of like lasting support for the Saturn in the West, I don't know about it, because once the Dreamcast was announced, that officially just kind of killed any other buzz the Saturn might have had.
Yeah, and any chance of Shining Force 3 being released in its entirety in our country. Sega, please, do a remaster. I beg you.
I mean, it's not out of left field, you know. RPG remasters are happening all the time. You know, Didn't they just announce like a Tales of remaster of one of the old games?
The thing is, they would have to do an actual translation of the latter two-thirds of the game. It was released as 3 full-length games, each of them a scenario, through which you would like import your save file, Mass Effect style, and it would affect what goes on. Your choices in battles and during the story would affect what goes on in each subsequent scenario.
I think that since the game's so old, Sega would probably retranslate the whole thing, to be honest.
Well, yeah, they would have to, because they changed the translation of the first game to make it seem like a standalone game when it really wasn't.
Let's be real, though. The Saturn is not going to officially die in any capacity until they give us proper remasters of like the big names that you have to spend an arm and a leg for to even have physically. So that would be like Burning Rangers, Panzer Dragoon Saga, I think is the game that comes to mind.
Well, they did a remake
in
of
regards to
Panzer
that.
Dragoon. I know that
They
people...
did a remake of Panzer Dragoon, yeah, the original game, but not Saga, not the RPG.
One of the things that might be holding them back is that the Saturn is just very easy to pirate for.
Is it? Not to the extent as the Dreamcast.
You just need to stick a cartridge in the thing, and
Well, you're already too much.
FBI, open up!
now,
I'm confused. What do you mean? Lewis, you're already confusing me, because I thought the Sega Saturn ran CDs.
yeah, there's a cartridge slot though.
And you're telling me to stick a cartridge
There's-
in the CD-ROM? I think you're trying to make me break my Saturn, Lewis.
There's this cartridge slot in the system. It's right there. You stick it in,
Yeah,
and it runs your game.
Yeah, I get it.
And it runs your backups. But like,
So I put the CD in the cartridge slot.
the point is,
No,
it's
man,
very
your
easy.
CD tray is not a cup holder.
It's very easy to just grab a Saturn off the internet and then like, you know, burn a bunch of CDs and play the old abandoned Saturn library. And the ease of that might be like discouraging Sega from doing much with the Saturn library.
So, remind me, because it's been a while. Saturns themselves are fairly cheap, relatively speaking. It's the games, and specifically the English games, that tend to be expensive, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because they were like, if you compare the price of the one scenario of Shining Force 3 that we got in English to the entire series in Japanese, what you get is the American version is clearly more expensive than all 3 of the others combined. You don't even need to do the math. It's that big of a difference. I think part of it is that the Saturn was just like way more successful over there, so more copies of each game were made.
That's definitely true for a lot of different things. You know, one thing that I know a lot is Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest 1 is fairly common, or Dragon Warrior, as you might know, on NES, is a fairly cheap game to get because they literally gave it away for free in Nintendo Power. They had so many copies.
It's also on everything.
Yeah. But if you want like the NES version, you can get it for like $20-$30. However, 2, 3, and especially 4 on NES were really, really rare because they didn't sell many copies in the States. So they're extremely pricey. And don't get me started on the frickin' DS versions. I feel really bad because I bought my DS copies of the Dragon Quest 4, 5, and 6 remakes in like 2011, 2012, and they were like $15 for 4, $20 for 5, and I think I paid a whole $40 for 6. Oh man, and all 3 games are like $150 now, and I'm just sad. because it's like those are my 3 of my. Okay, I'm not gonna say 3 because 6 kind of is. But 4 and 5 are some of my favorite RPGs of all time. I would like more people to be able to play them, and I can't in good conscience recommend anybody pay $150 for any video game, which is part of why I'm never gonna be able to play Path of Radiance or Radiant Dawn either, for the record. Because
I mean, at that point, just emulate them.
Dolphin is incredibly reliable. I'm actually surprised.
Like, if you genuinely want to play the game, it is okay to pirate them. Like, you're not going to reasonably afford a physical version of that unless they re-release it.
I have complicated opinions with emulation and piracy in general.
Okay.
Not like, here's the thing. I don't feel bad about Nintendo losing money on somebody pirating Fire Emblem, because they're not losing money. Nintendo makes $0 on every copy of Path of Radiance sold because it's all third-party sellers. They're actively losing money by not releasing it. That's a different argument entirely.
Yes.
So more, it's just one, I don't really like playing games on my PC very much, so that's one.
Which is fair.
It's not as comfy. I prefer lying down when I'm playing video games. That's just one thing.
What you need?
An immediate solution is a Steam Deck.
Yeah, I was gonna say what you need is a Steam Deck.
Listen, the whole point of this discussion was me not spending $150 on something.
Yeah, but we're talking about spending $150 on a singular game as opposed to making an investment on something that can play you many games.
The Steam Deck, I've heard good things about as far as it running
it's legit
stuff.
great.
But
I saw a friend of mine's at Too Many Games. It looked neat. I wasn't a huge fan of the form factor, but being able to play your huge Steam library on the go is definitely a really cool thing. But just my other thing is just that, again, I don't feel a lick bad about Nintendo losing money to pirates, but there are other things where if in indie dev, just as an example, if people pirate an indie dev's game when it is easily available, then that's a different story. And I like to be internally consistent at the very least, where it's just like, I wouldn't download a car.
I don't think there's a thing to be consistent with, though, in regards to this topic. I will agree like in regards to like indie stuff that is easily and readily available and it's like available for like $10-15. You got no fucking reason to pirate something like that.
Well, what we're talking about right now is the concept of abandonware. It's a specific classification that people give to programs that have not been officially released in any capacity in any reasonable amount of time. So there is literally no effect to it being pirated until such a time as the intellectual property owners release an official version of it. At that point, the distributors will usually just take it offline because now you can actually buy it. Go buy it, scrubs.
Yeah, there's a difference between right now pirating, let's say, Path of Radiance versus Thousand Year Door, just as a recent example. That just got remade. It's on store shelves right now.
Yeah.
There's less of a reason to pirate that other than you don't want to pay for it, as opposed to Path of Radiance, where it's like, okay, you can't get that right now. There's no real
If you are genuinely interested in Little Samson on the NES,
are you though?
Then I would. My point is, don't fucking spend $1,600 on a physical copy just to play the fucking game. I see it go for that high. Yes.
Damn. Man.
It's the age-old debate about games preservation that's in play here.
I don't think there's much of a debate. Don't fucking spend $1,600 on a goddamn physical video game. Like there's always the collector's appeal for it, obviously. But if you're just trying to play the fucking game because you're curious about it, emulate. And if it's not re-released and easily available, emulate that shit. I used to be pretty like anti-emulation myself, like years back. Especially like on my channel specifically, I was keen on trying to play the game off genuine hardware when and if I could, because I like to play off genuine hardware, because that wasn't so much like it's the moral thing to do, but also because, you know, back then especially, I couldn't rely on emulators being able to properly emulate the game 100% accurately. That was one thing. But also it's because, man, like, I don't want to fucking spend a mortgage like on a copy of Mortal Kombat Mythologies on the PlayStation 1.
Is Mortal Kombat Mythologies?
But my point is, I don't want to spend an arm and a leg on a physical game anymore, because sometimes, man, like something like Metal Gear Ghost Babel on the Game Boy Color, I spent $100 on that fucking thing.
Yikes.
Just to physically have it.
Yeah, it's a complicated issue, one which I have conflicting opinions about, and I haven't really worked it out, but definitely in the case of it's definitely a different story when the game is something that just has never been released ever since it was first came out, and it costs. And I get the big thing for me is that the developers are not the ones getting that money for it, you know? Like, I don't know who the hell developed Ghost Babel Metal Gear Solid for the Game Boy Color, but I don't think they're getting any money for it when you buy it at a convention store.
When it comes to the general topic of piracy, the one thing I'm cynical about is the way people talk about it when they're trying to defend it, where they'll say it's all about the game's preservation, or they'll outright say that it's some kind of like moral superior, like it's some kind of moral high ground. Like, it's like you should pirate because these companies. I'm just like, yeah, no, I don't believe in honor among thieves, except for the Dungeons and Dragons movie. That was pretty good.
Oh, I've heard that's good. I've been meaning to watch it for forever. I just haven't gotten around.
Was that the most recent one?
That was the one with Chris Pine, who has overtaken Chris Pratt as being the worst Chris. So, congratulations to Chris Pine for being like third best Chris, I think.
You know, wait, he was the one who played the Bard, right?
I think so.
Yes, Chris Pine was the Bard.
He was playing some serious hard mode D&D there. 2nd edition Bard in a 5th edition game.
I did watch that movie with Nora and Elliot, and I ended up enjoying that.
Yeah, I've heard it's great. And it like kind of came and went with no fanfare. I think that's probably because it came out in like 2021. So
it's good. It's good shit. It's Dungeons and Dragons with a very wacky dungeon master. The one thing I don't like is the way they handled the Bard character, who was the protagonist, by the way. But like, he's a bard who does nothing that a bard can do. Because
I remember the first thought I had, like, seeing the movie is like, oh, Michelle Rodriguez is in here. Okay, how is she gonna die?
Does she die in every movie she's in?
She dies in everything.
Is she the Sean Bean of?
Maybe.
Wait.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Lewis.
Wait, is she the barbarian?
Yeah, she's a barbarian.
Oh, okay. I know. I know the plot twist attached to that, but I'm not gonna spoil it.
Yeah.
Do they have an arc where the characters can't get together for 3 months because nobody is free on the same day?
I think that the main characters were in prison for more than 3 months.
So that might as well be the equivalent of it, perhaps.
Ah, man. Good movie.
That is genuinely, like, I don't even play D&D, but as someone who lives with someone that does, that is like the most heart-wrenching thing that can happen, isn't it? So you get a session ready and you can't make it because someone can't.
You know, especially when people are, you know, we're getting to the point where we're in our 30s, so everybody we know is like having children and have full-time jobs, and it's just like, oh, you're not just free every Tuesday night anymore? Oh, I see how it is. Abandoning me. How dare you have a fulfilling life with family that you care and love dearly?
There are ways to get around that. Roll20 and other online play platforms are pretty good, but, you know, if you want to have that tabletop experience, it's rough. Ugh. I don't even have a table.
Literally the one thing you need in a tabletop experience, and you can't even fucking do that right.
Listen, if you can't, like, just do what you did when you were 7 years old and roll it all out on the floor, you know? All right? Your back is gonna hate you for it, but at least you can still play, you know?
You need to have a surface that you can roll dice on, but, you know.
You can roll dice on anything if you try hard enough.
Not on a carpet, you can't.
In fact, I will roll some dice right now. It's 3.
Like, all the floors in my house growing up were carpet, you know? There was no hard surface to roll a die on. You needed to find some sort of, like, board or something to put on there.
But you can put it on a book.
Well, it would have to be a pretty big book.
Not really. Just
Dice can't roll very well in a contained area unless they have raised borders to keep the dice in. Otherwise, they just go tumbling off, and it's wasted.
what matters is that it tumbles though in order to roll. And then you can just look and see what the result
But it
is.
also needs to stay on that surface.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
I don't know who made that rule, but I was not here to it.
Otherwise, it just lands on the carpet. You might as well have rolled it straight on the carpet. Come on.
What matters is that it tumbles. I will die on this dice.